pastors have not done a good enough job explaining that God already is in love with you. You don't have to prove yourself. You just get to walk into his love and experience him. And that when you love him, you want to do the things he says. That's what I used to think when Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. I used to think that he was being passive aggressive, like if you love me, prove it,
Yeah.
Oh, but I don't think that anymore. I think he's saying, hey, if you'll just focus on loving on me, man, don't worry, you'll do what I say. Because the commands of God are not burdensome when you're in love.
Well, what is going on, everybody? I just want to welcome the man himself, my lead pastor, Pastor Brandon Cannon.
What's up?
Tell the people how you're doing, my man.
Man, I am doing good. It is cold outside, and I got a hot cup of coffee within arm's reach. So I am doing good today.
I got that warm cup of coffee.
Always. Well, it's not warm. It is scalding hot. That's why I'm not drinking it right now. All right.
Well, praise the Lord. Well, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your family, and how you came to Christ.
All right. So, my name is Brandon. I got a wonderful wife named Autumn and two kids who are 11 and 13, both of them going on 21. They are ready to go. And we live in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Started our church in 2012. But my journey with Christ actually began, from the time I was born. My dad was a pastor, so we never missed a Sunday. He even got out of ministry for 2 or 3 years, but we still never missed a Sunday. But for me, I got saved on October 26, 1996. So I had been around church all my life. I actually won every single Bible bowl I was in, right? I could quote all the scriptures. Yeah, but I had no idea who Jesus was, right? It made it to my head, but never my heart, And one day I was sitting in the balcony of this church service, and this evangelist just simply said, he said, it's one thing to know Jesus. It's another thing to know, or it's one thing to know about him, another thing to know him. And he just started talking about what a relationship with God was like. And I remember going, wow, I've never heard that before. I want that, And so I literally ran to the altar. Like I ran there and fell and had like carpet burn on my kneecaps, that kind of thing. But I didn't care, got saved, and the rest is history.
So. How long have you been at Real Life Church?
So we started the church in 2012. And so this is 2020, or almost the end of 2020. So coming up on 10 years pretty soon.
And the cool thing about you too is that you actually started RLC. You had a church plant 8 years ago. And I know we'll get a little bit more into the details maybe later, but I like how the fact that you never intended on being here in Bowling Green.
Yeah.
You just were searching around and you were picking cities, and you kind of wanted to circle the ones that you wanted instead of what God wanted,
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is, so first of all, I never wanted to be a lead pastor. That was never my goal. My dad was a pastor, and we used to have this phrase. People would go home and they would call it roast preacher for dinner. They talk about all the things the preacher did wrong. Well, we had roast member for dinner every day, I mean, and my dad was one of those, he never shied away from the fact that real people were church people, right? So I knew who was sleeping with who, I knew who was talking about who, I knew all of it. And so I saw what my dad went through. And I love Jesus, and I wanted to serve God's church, but I did not want to be a pastor. So no one was as surprised as me when God started to change my ministry from an associate pastor and in charge of music ministries to being a pastor. But when God started dealing with my heart to change everything, I talked to my accountability partners, prayer partners, my pastor at the time, and all of them knew it before I did. I was the last one to really figure it out. But I had saw where good people doing a good thing had bad results when they would, just go across town and start a church. They would split a good church. And so my wife and I just said we weren't going to do that. So I promised my pastor I wouldn't plant a church within 100 miles of that church, because I figured that was too far for anybody to drive, And so you're right. We just went on prayer trips to different cities, and we circled all the cities we wanted to go to. My wife actually circled Bowling Green, but I didn't. I had no desire to come to Bowling Green, but that's always how God works. And when we came here, it's just to this day, I can't explain what happened. Like we went to the mall, and mainly because my girls were 1 and 3 at the time and they needed to get out and walk, and
Sure.
so we took them to the carousel. I'm over in the food court, and I just, for the first time, I just look around and just say, God, what about this city? And I still can't, the closest I can do to put it into words what happened to me is I felt like I was at home. I just immediately felt like I had been in this city all my life. I felt like I knew everybody walking beside me. I loved them immediately. And actually the cool thing is I wanted to test it because I was so afraid that if anything happened, I was gonna be like, this is the place. And so I went up to an old couple that was walking through the mall, and they're like old, grouchy looking couple. They were kind of fussing with each other. And I was like, this is gonna be awesome. So I walk up to them and I'm like, hey, y'all don't know me, obviously, but I'm thinking about moving to Bowling Green. And if I did, where should I go to church? And I'm telling you, man, it was the coolest thing ever. Both of them looked at me and they gave me the biggest smile. And they said, you know what, young man, there's a lot of good churches here in this city, but we've been praying for God to do something new. So I don't know when you're moving here, but whenever you do, maybe there'll be a new church here.
Huh.
So I just freaked out. I mean, I started crying. I told them who I was, and they were like, they weren't very impressed. They were like, well, that's great. Well, maybe you'll plant that church. Have a good Christmas,
Yeah.
But for me, it was awesome. And that's really been how God's always had to do it in my life. I've always been super stubborn. And so God's always kind of always kind of had to back into God's will for my life.
Yeah.
But he's always faithful,
So right now you are a lead pastor here in Bowling Green, and you said you never wanted to become a pastor, but it sounded like you've been a pastor for such a long time. You've been an associate pastor, you've been a worship pastor. How exactly did you become a pastor, and how long total now have you been a pastor?
So my dad, he started to see this passion and desire in me for ministry from probably the time I was a young teenager. And so when I was 16 is when I went to him and I just said, look, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I just know I want to serve God, and I don't have a calling. I thought you had to have like a lightning bolt hit you in the head and this kind of stuff. I just started to explain to him that all I thought about was helping people get closer to Jesus. It was all I was passionate about. My dad was like, Brandon, that's a calling,
Yeah.
And so he started giving me opportunities to preach and different things. And so from the time I was about 17 years old, I really moved into the associate pastor of his church. And when the time was right, when I was 19, I actually had an opportunity to go and serve at a church as a music pastor. And that guy still is a great friend of mine. And then that led to another opportunity, And so I've been in ministry. I'm 38 now, and I've been serving in ministry since I was 16, 17 years old, with something that would have a title attached to it. But I thought my goal in life was going to be just to lead worship and be the very best number 2 guy ever. Like that was my goal. I wanted to honor a pastor, honor his vision. I loved to love on people, and then if something went wrong, I would just send them down the hall, to the lead
Don't
pastor.
talk to that guy.
Yeah, that's the guy who deals with the problems,
Yeah.
And so that never was, and honestly, it was just because I didn't feel like I could do the job. I just thought I am not that guy, but God always knows better than we do.
Mm-hmm. So what does your typical everyday schedule look like nowadays? Sunday's always typically busy for pastors, but for the average person who isn't a pastor, they have no idea what pastors do. Some may think pastors just pick their nose all day. Some may think they're doing visits all the time. So what's your schedule look like?
So I learned pretty early on that Sunday comes around every 7 days, right? We've never yet missed a Sunday. They always come around. And I realized pretty quick that Sunday could become a monster because you do all these other things, but Sunday's the big day. And so what I learned to do pretty early is divide my week up into every day. I try to do something different so that it doesn't all kind of come at me, because there's so many things that we do in ministry that no one ever sees. But if you don't do all those things well, Sunday never happens. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm a firm believer in the fact that you have to have a Sabbath time of rest. Now, that doesn't mean I kick my feet up, but I actively pursue my relationship with God on Sabbath day. I rest in God's presence and then for me, that's Monday. And so I do that on Mondays. I deal with things. I heal every Monday after Sunday. I do all those different things. And then Tuesday is all day message prep day for me. That's to get a jump start. It takes me about 20 hours a week of that's just for that week. Now, it actually takes a lot longer than that because everything I do goes into the message, but it's just that particular Sunday, just getting the outline together, and that is 20 hours a week. So I get a big head start on it and make sure the outline itself is done. The framework is done by the end of the day on Tuesday. Then Wednesday is what I call my people day. I have staff meetings in the mornings, and we have one-on-one meetings. Then I have other meetings with people as we need to, small groups, different things. And I usually try to carve out an hour or two a day to do very specific for that Sunday research. Thursday is also a people day. So it's a lot of meetings, it's hospital visits, it is encouraging other pastors, different things. And I also carve out a couple of hours to do research as well. And then Friday is all day research as much as I need to. Before I leave my office Friday, I have written out a manuscript of my message. Also, if I have to have leadership meetings, I do that on Friday. I also have a lot of times if we have budget meetings, we do those on Fridays. We do life groups on Fridays, all those different types of things. And then Saturday, I spend the first half of my day in prayer, in preparing for Sunday as well, in counseling sessions if I do those. And then I try to spend the last half of Saturday with my family. And so that's kind of how that works. And interspersed with all that are things that you can't plan for. Tragedies, unexpected things, something tears up, there's a leak, there's a, whatever happens, that always happens. And so every morning I wake up with a plan, fully understanding I may have to throw that plan away.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I work best when I have a plan, so that if nothing gets in the way, I know that by the end of the week, I've got everything done.
So has it been hard for you? I mean, since day one, you haven't wanted to be a pastor. So I know after 20 some years, you're kind of used to your everyday habits and stuff, but has it been hard for you to adjust to where you're at now?
Absolutely. I think the number one lesson I learned when it comes to schedule is there's no such thing as a schedule that never gets tweaked. I used to think that I was going to have a schedule, and if I could ever figure out a perfect schedule, then my life would be set. And I realized that doesn't exist. There is a healthy schedule for the season you're in. And then the way you know when that set schedule doesn't work anymore is when it stops working. When you have to make the schedule work instead of the schedule working for you. That's when it's time to adjust it. So, for instance, when we first started the church, my kids were babies. And so my schedule looked very different because I was working bivocationally. My wife had 2 jobs as well. We had small kids. And so we had to figure things out. And I basically worked 3rd shift at the church. I did that, and I just slept an odd time. It was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so different stages of my family and different stages of our church has required different levels of commitment. I went through a season for about 3 years when I was coaching around 10 different pastors. It was just something God was leading me to do at the time. And so I had a significant portion of my schedule every week just handling, encouraging these guys. And so that was a season. I'm getting ready to get into a season where I'm going to start doing a lot more writing, a lot of different things. And so I'm already looking at how I'm going to tweak my schedule again to have writing time to get that part of my ministry. So it has always done it. And honestly, the schedule has helped me ease into feeling more confident as a pastor, because I make sure that I have plenty of time to do the one thing that nobody else in our church can do. And that is pastor our people.
Yeah.
Pastoring on Sunday and also pastoring through the week. And because it doesn't come natural to me, it takes me longer. I know guys who, it takes them 8 hours a week spread out over, an hour or 2 a day. And that's what they do. And then they got all this extra time. I just had to learn at a young age, that's just not my story.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because pastoring is one of the most context specific vocations there is. And so it's almost always a mistake to try to be like somebody else, because no one can ever be the person that God wants to pastor your church except you. And so you've got to figure out how God has made you, and then you be that very best person pursuing him. And that's what you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time. And honestly, I still deal with it. I hear of a church that I really admire, and I want to just throw everything away and be just like them. But when I find my sweet spot, which is who has God called me to be, and then I make my schedule so that I can do only those things, there's life there.
Yeah.
I get to where I don't dread getting up on Sunday mornings. I don't dread getting up, going to meetings in the mornings, because it's exhausting to try to be somebody else.
Yeah.
But it's actually life-giving to be the person God's called you to be.
Yeah. Well, you're talking a lot in your schedule how you want to encourage other people. And in this podcast, I want to specifically talk about how to encourage other pastors. I know you do that a lot already, but I think some people get the misconception of why in the world would pastor needs encouraged? I mean, they have it made. Every Sunday is their work day, and then the rest of the week they're fine. But I've realized that people don't realize how much they need their pastor until they need their pastor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I want to ask you some questions that I know most people probably think or are wondering, but I want you just to answer from your heart, and maybe it'll encourage another pastor, or maybe you will encourage somebody that is just listening that is not a part of a church or anything like that. So a big question that I've always wondered is, as well as maybe other people, is how many times have you wanted to quit ministry? Now, I know the answer. I know we've personally talked about it. But I think sometimes people think there's no way a pastor would want to quit ministry. But I'm going to assume personally, the answer is probably a lot. So I'll just go ahead and pass it over to you.
So more times than I'd like to admit, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing like pastoring a church, because so the average CEO is expected to do his job well and once a year have one speech to all the shareholders. And however, a pastor has to do his very best job behind the scenes, and he has to give his very best message to the shareholders of the company once a week. And so it is very different. And honestly, especially in our generation today, because in generations gone by, a pastor was seen as a local community leader who honored and loved and shepherded people. Nowadays, pastors are seen as CEOs. They have to have both the business leader and the pastor leader, and somehow be a husband and father, and be a Christ follower, and somewhere in there as well, be everybody's personal life coach, at the same time. And most pastors I know live with a constant sense of insecurity, because in some area of their life, they feel like they're failing. If they're doing really good at the CEO world, they're neglecting their pastor shepherd mantle. Or if they're doing well in that, they feel like they're not being a husband and father. And so there's some area where most pastors struggle with feeling like they're enough. And then over top of all of that, there's a spiritual warfare component.
Yeah.
If you can, Jesus talked about strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. And that's the same thing in the spiritual world. When you have a pastor of a flock, if you can destroy the pastor, you create chaos in God's people. And you see that every time a notable pastor falls in ministry, is there's all these people who put their hope in them, which they shouldn't. They should put their hope in Jesus, but people do. Then all those people are now discouraged. And so there's so many different components. So to be honest with you, there was a season when it was on the weekly, where I had a wonderful mentor tell me, he said, whatever you do, don't make any life-changing decisions on Mondays because you are either feeling great because everything went well and you're going to get out of in front of your skis, or you're going to feel terrible and do something stupid. So don't make any decisions. And so the same pastor told me, if you ever want to quit, write a resignation letter, but hold it for 3 days. And if you still feel that way, go give it to somebody. If you don't feel that way, don't throw it away, tear it up and burn it. And so I have made a few of those, honestly, just because of many times it was just feeling like I'm never going to be good enough. I'm never going to get this right. And so it is something that is very real. To be honest with you, I probably know of one or two pastors every year that I have a personal relationship that get out of ministry. And out of all the pastors that I have known, I have only known 3 in my life who retired from ministry, that didn't either lose their ministry because of some kind of failure or quit. I only know 3. And I'm talking about, I've had the honor to know a lot of people, and most of them don't retire. They get discouraged and they quit, or they get discouraged and do something they regretted and had to quit.
So with that being said, how would you feel if you looked back and, started all over again, I mean, is this something that you would consider doing again?
Do you know different seasons of my life would have given you very different answers?
Yeah.
Because the first 6 months of our church, the only reason why our church stayed open was because we paid the bills,
Yeah.
and we had a grand total of like 23 people, and all this. And so I would have said no, you know,
Yeah.
but absolutely though, absolutely. Because the thing is God gives you the grace for the season that you're in. And honestly, if you're in a difficult season, chances are you're a lot stronger than you realize, because God is not an abusive stepfather. He is a good father.
Yeah.
So he only puts you in a place that he knows you can handle. And honestly, even if that handling means that you know how to turn to him, but
Mhm.
either way, he's not going to put you in a place that he doesn't also equip you with the ability to handle. And so um, I would say I would never do it any other way, because I have got to see so many miracles. Now, the problem is everybody wants a testimony, but nobody wants the test that requires the miracle. And that's the hard part. If you could ever have all the miracles and none of the tests, that'd be perfect, but that's not how life works. And so I wouldn't take anything because of all those bright moments, but unfortunately, we don't grow on mountaintops, we grow in valleys. And those growth moments only happen in the deep darkness of those valleys. But at the same time, the closeness, the closest I've ever felt to God is in those deep valleys. I mean, there's been moments in my life in pastoring when, we had horrible things happen. We had people try to turn against us and ruin our church. Times when even my wife wasn't talking to me. You know what I mean? Just because of my attitude, everybody was against me. But when I go to my prayer time, I could still feel my heavenly Father with his arm on my shoulder saying, "Hey, I haven't given up on you."
Mhm.
I wouldn't take anything for those moments, but those moments happened in dark seasons. So um, I wouldn't take anything for it. I wish I had found some easier ways to do it, maybe
Yeah.
a few less mistakes, which is why things like what you're doing are so important. Is when I first started RLC, I had a lot of acquaintances. I had very few friends, and I had very few close people that I could have serious conversations with, that I could assume level 10 with. Just automatically go, look, here's all my junk. I need to be honest with somebody.
Yeah.
And because I didn't have that, I just wandered around in the dark for a while. And finally, when I understood that, wow, other pastors struggle, other pastors don't have it all figured out, we all need each other. C.S. Lewis once said, the most encouraging thing someone else can tell you is, me too. I'm going through that as well.
Mm.
And having moments when you realize, hey, you know what? Life stinks and we're all in the same boat, but Jesus is faithful. There's so much healing, because a lot of pastors live on islands all by themselves. And having things like what you're doing, where they just kind of can hear people go, yeah, it's tough, that it's more encouraging than a lot of people realize.
So talking a little bit about your dark seasons and stuff, obviously you don't have to go into 100% detail if you don't want to, but I just want to ask you, what would you consider one of your biggest mistakes you have made in ministry personally?
I think the two things, well, I did three things I would say that stick out immediately. Number one is I thought that my worth was attached to my success. And so when we first launched the church, um, every new person that came in the church was another example of my calling being sure, if that makes sense. Like someone else came to church, and so that means God's proud of me, and I'm a success, and I'm proving all the naysayers wrong and all this. Because I had people tell me when we moved, to Bowling Green, that it wasn't ever going to work and all that kind of stuff. And so every time a new person would come in, I was proving them wrong, that kind of thing. The problem is if you live by the crowd, you'll die by the crowd. And when the crowd wasn't coming, all of a sudden I'm a failure. And so I got into a workaholic state where
Mm.
I was working all the time, to the point that I got into serious burnout.
Mm.
And it wasn't for some good friends and some overseers in my life literally telling me they were going to take my church away from me if I didn't put some things in my life and get counseling in my life, then I would have probably done something stupid at some point. I actually got to the place where for just a moment I got to just the brink of almost being suicidal.
Mm.
because I felt like such a failure because I thought my worth was attached to my success. And my lowest moment was I was sitting at a red light, and I was waiting, and I was so depressed. It was so dark that I remember thinking, if I hit the gas pedal right now, I'd have an accident, I'd die, and everybody would think it'd be a mistake. And it scared me. And that's when I called one of my overseers and I said, I need help.
Mm.
I'm not okay. But it was because I attached my worth to my success. And the second thing was not focusing on emotional health, not realizing that everybody needs a place where someone couldn't care less and they couldn't care more.
Yeah.
I don't care that you're not perfect, but I want to help you as much as I can. And I needed that in my life. And so I had to submit myself to counseling, to mental health and emotional counseling, just to say, look, I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
Need help. And I used to look at counseling as something to be ashamed of, but I realize now it's a blessing. And I do it just for mental health now. It's kind of like going to get a physical every year. I go sit with someone once a year and just say, look, here's my junk. Am I doing all right?
Yeah.
And then my third one was that I would say probably one of the biggest ones for me was not letting people in, not letting people into my life. Growing up in a pastor's home, I watched my dad get taken advantage of a lot. And I had just decided that wasn't going to be me, and so I just automatically assumed that you take enough time and you will let me down. And so I didn't trust anybody. And I had to go through a long season of finding my identity in Jesus and hugging people tightly, but holding them loosely, loving people, but then realizing if they leave, there's nothing wrong with me or anything wrong with them. It's just seasons. But I had to find my identity in Jesus. And those were three of the darkest seasons that I would never want to go through them again. But I am who I am today because God, I heard someone say one time, God will pull you through anything if you can stand the pull.
Mhm.
And that's really what happened is God started pulling me through these seasons that were so hard, but I learned so much. And then what God does then is sometimes he'll put you in places where he can help you to help the next person. And so I've been able to walk with people who would say, you wouldn't understand. And they say, try me, and then they go, well, once I thought about committing suicide one time. And I say, yeah, me too. Yeah. One time I was so depressed, I had to go to counseling. Yeah, me too. That kind of stuff. And just to realize that, God doesn't waste anything, even your darkness, he doesn't waste it.
So something else I want to talk about here is I know we all have mistakes and we all have darkness, but I feel like in our culture nowadays, something that is neglected a lot is seeing the positive rather than just looking at negative. Because I feel like negativity is very loud and
Oh
in
yeah.
your face. Positivity, you have to kind of search for it.
Yeah.
So in ministry, we often miss those little moments. And I know you talk about this every week where we have to bring a win to our staff meeting. What would you say your biggest joy in ministry has been?
Oh, wow. My biggest joy is watching people. Well, okay, so two things. Number one is having an opportunity for my kids to grow up in a church without drama. One of the things that we focus on, and every church has got that, that kind of thing. But I grew up in churches that just had a lot of drama, and I love watching my kids love going to church because they love being around people. They think church is a great thing. They think that church people are not perfect, but they love each other and that kind of stuff. And I love that. And then my second thing is watching people grow in their relationship with God and realizing that it happens slowly. There was a gentleman who had been to our church. He came to our church the third week our church was open. And just earlier this year, sitting at Starbucks, I got to lead him to Christ. And he's in his 60s, somewhere in his 60s. And statistically, I think it's like a 20 something percent chance once you get past 55, if you've never made a profession of Christ, that you'll get saved. And I got to watch him. And he told me, he said, I went to church all those years. I heard you lead people through the salvation prayer.
Yeah.
I always thought God would never take that from me. He would never listen to me. But he said, the more I heard it, the more I started going, I really do want to do that. Maybe God would receive that. And so then getting to watch him take that step, because you can tell people about Jesus all the time, but there's something about having to experience God that you just can't explain.
Mhm.
You You just can't explain it. And that's what happened with this guy is, he was like, Pastor, I just don't know. I just don't know. But what happens if nothing happens? I was like, what do you expect to happen, man? It's a miracle. You're not going to, you may not even feel anything, because miracles are not about feelings. They're about changed life, And so I prayed with him, and he was like, man, I really do feel better. I said, yeah, but don't think about how you feel. What do you know? And he was like, I know that I'm saved. I know that I'm going to go to heaven one day. And he calls me the next day. He couldn't hardly talk because of tears. And he was just like, I woke up this morning and man, the sky was blue, and just, and he was experiencing the joy of salvation, and that is some of the biggest joys, is watching people take steps and being a part of their life. Everyone's got a different calling, and my calling is just, I just want to be the greatest catalyst of life change in other people. Like, I want to believe in people and watch their life just explode in everything God's called them to be. And so I've never had this desire to have a big ministry. I just want to be a big help in other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And seeing that in people is just, other than my family, is my greatest joy.
So let's transition this for a second. I know when you first get saved, people always encourage you to read your Bible, and pray and talk to God and stuff like that. I've always had this thought in my head, like, when you first get saved, you have no idea where to go. You really going to read Lamentations right away?
No, man, Leviticus is the way to go.
Bring that Leviticus in there. So for somebody listening right now, what would you consider a consistent reading schedule? How do you have a consistent reading schedule, and how could you help somebody along that process as well?
So when somebody gets saved, I try to be as real and honest with them as possible. I say, whatever you do, don't start at the beginning, because it's tough. I tell them, actually, what I will do a lot of times, if I have the chance, is I will tell them, you know what, for the next 21 days, I want us to read the Bible together. And what I will do, if I have this chance to have a one-on-one with them, that's what I'll do, because I'll say, let's read through the book of John together. And every morning I want us to text each other and tell me what you got out of it. Because I think a lot of times we focus on quantity rather than quality. And I don't care. You can read 10 chapters a day, but if nothing sinks in, you've been wasting your time. The Word of God doesn't work by like osmosis. It just kind of filters. No, it's what you get on the inside that matters. Mm-hmm. And so what I'll tell them to do is, let's read one chapter a day. I'd rather someone read one chapter a day and read it slowly than read 4 chapters a day super fast. And
why do you think, because even for me, why do you think in our church culture, we have created this thought process, like, if you read the Bible more, you're super saved?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's always been quantity over quality in that aspect?
Yeah, it's not new to us. It goes all the way back to the book of Galatians. When Paul is talking to the church at Galatia, he's saying, what happened? You love Jesus, and now it's all about accomplishment, legalism. We think somehow that at some point we're going to earn our salvation. We're going to earn our righteousness. And what I love is, Paul says our righteousness is as filthy rags. And I'm learning Greek right now. And that phrase, filthy rags, is actually disgusting. It means soiled menstrual cloths. It's in other words, he's not saying dirty, knock it all. He's saying you are disgusting on your best day. Isn't that the worst thing ever? Like, I don't think I want to learn Greek anymore. I'm good.
A different perspective of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's saying on your best day, you are disgusting in the eyes of God. You just can't get there.
Yeah.
And what Paul was telling the church in Galatia is, at what point did you think you were going to be good enough? But you continually strive. And I think what happens is when we first receive Christ, we're so in love and so passionate about God. We just want to get to know him. It's like when you first start dating somebody, you're buying them candy and roses and stuff, and you're taking them everywhere. But eventually you start going, do I got to keep buying them all this stuff? Can we just go chill? You get tired of it. And then it just becomes a emotion or whatever. Mm. And I think it's what we do in our relationship with God. It starts off as, I just want to get to know Jesus. And after a while, it becomes legalism. And we think that I've got to do this for God to like me. And if we ever could realize that we operate from approval, not for approval, it changes everything. Mm-hmm. Our quiet time is never about getting God's approval for the day. It's about talking to our best friend. And I think that somewhere, including myself, I put myself in this category, we as pastors have not done a good enough job explaining that God already is in love with you. You don't have to prove yourself. You just get to walk into his love and experience him. And that when you love him, you want to do the things he says. That's what I used to think when Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. I used to think that he was being passive aggressive, like if you love me, prove it,
Yeah.
Oh, but I don't think that anymore. I think he's saying, hey, if you'll just focus on loving on me, man, don't worry. You'll do what I say, because the commands of God are not burdensome when you're in love.
Mm.
I don't have to focus. I don't have to get up every day and say, today I'm not going to cheat on my wife. I don't have to do that. Instead, what I do is I get up every day and say, man, I love my wife and I'm going to love her even more. And so I'm nowhere even close to cheating on her because I stay in love. But I think what happens in our relationship with God is we somehow think, if I can read the Bible enough, if I can pray long enough, if I can fast long enough, if I can serve, somehow I'll get God's attention and get God's favor. But if we ever realize he already likes you, he already has good things for you, he already wants to bless you, then all you're doing is that's your communion with him. It changes everything. But we lose that because we humans have a way of making a rule out of everything instead of just having a relationship.
So I know this personally, you love to read.
I love to read.
Yeah, all those books in the background of that video right there. Oh,
yeah.
There's tons of books back there. What would you say? I know this is putting you on the spot and you may not know the answer. What would you say the most influential book besides the Bible?
Oh, come on, man. That was going to be easy. Yes, I can tell you right now, The Tale of Three Kings. Have you ever read that?
No, you've been trying to get me to read it.
Yeah. So it is a very short little book, but it is a little story about Saul, David, and Absalom. And in that story, there are three kings, and 2 out of 3 of them had horrible endings. And the writer is trying to say, nobody knows the heart of a man but God himself, and God doesn't tell you. only that person. And I read this book every year, and what it does is it reminds me that hurting people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And almost everyone has an agenda, and that doesn't mean they're evil. It just means when someone walks in, they bring all their hopes, all their dreams, but also all their pain and all of their brokenness with them. And so you have to be so very careful not to judge people, because you have no idea. Is this person a Saul? They're just prideful. Is it an Absalom, someone who never got the love of his father? Or is it David, someone whose heart is after God? Only God knows. And he's probably not going to tell you, So I constantly am reminded that if someone cuts me off in traffic, it doesn't mean that they're a jerk. It means that they're running late. That's all,
Sure.
Or it could mean, it could mean they're insecure and they think they have to hurry up and get somewhere because they're trying to prove themselves to somebody. I mean, we could get as deep as you want to go, but to be so very careful to give people some slack, because everyone's got a private battle no one else knows about. And that book reminds me of it every year when I read it.
I love it. So, big question of the day. You ready for this one?
Here we go.
What do you think, and this is opinion based, what do you think the Big C Church of America needs most right now?
I think the Big C Church right now, they need people to fall passionately in love with Jesus again, to get rid of their logos, get rid of their egos, and just fall in love with Jesus. I think that in the United States, for very good reasons, we have turned the church into a corporation, and we need that. We need to know how to because we're not fighting against other churches. We're fighting against Disneyland. We're fighting against Hollywood as far as for people's attention, all that stuff. So we need all that. But at some point we quit being a church and we started becoming organizations. And I think the next wave of the church is going to be people just falling passionately in love with Jesus, and people saying, you know what? I don't care how big my church is. I just want everyone in my church to fall in love with Jesus too. And I think that's the next big wave, because I think people are tired of the big box church world. I'm not saying that those are bad and that they're going anywhere. I'm just saying that even in the big churches, that there's still going to be this call to passionate, deep relationship. And because you look in our world right now, everyone's got an opinion, but very few people have relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the next big thing that's going to happen. I think the Big C Church needs to fall less in love with our egos and our logos and our processes and our procedures, and fall a little bit more in love with Jesus. This is my opinion.
I sure hope so. I mean, I pray that for, our students often, that they would just have a deep relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And, I believe exactly the same thing. I think we just have missed our mark just a little bit. I think we had good intentions going in.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I think we missed our mark a little bit. And I think
You
it's
know,
just time.
I haven't even, so here it is, staff meeting, right? I haven't told you this, but one of the things that God's been dealing with my heart about is for this coming year, what if we didn't focus at all on growing a single person? Now, we hope that they do. We hope that these things happen. But what instead we say, God, thank you for who you have sent us. How can we help every one of those people take a step this year? You
Mhm.
know, it reminds me of Truett Cathy, the guy who founded Chick-fil-A. They said that he was in a meeting one time and there were some different other companies that were big competition for them. And they were in this big meeting on how they were going to defeat their competition. And they need to have better products, or excuse me, more products and more stores, all that stuff. And they said that Truett Cathy, who is normally a very quiet, observant guy, stood up and he pounded his fists on the table. And he said, all of y'all just be quiet. And he said, if we will just get better, our customers will demand that we get bigger.
Mhm.
And he said, they just stopped everything and said, okay, we're not going to try to grow any bigger. We're just going to try to get better. And I think as a church that we have wanted to get bigger, and we should, because heaven and hell matter and every person needs to see Jesus. But we haven't focused on getting better, better at the Great Commission, better at discipling people, better at helping people figure out how to do a relationship with God themselves. And
Mhm.
I think as a church, if we would focus just a little bit less on procedure and a little bit more on just getting more in love with Jesus and getting better, then our customers would demand we get bigger, if that makes sense. So that's something God's been doing in my heart just in the past month.
I 100% agree with you, man.
Yeah, right here. You heard it first. Boom.
You heard it first here from Pastor Brandon from Real Life Church.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of deep things, man, and I appreciate your honesty and your transparency. And I know 100% it's going to help somebody. Just want to ask you personally a couple more questions. And I ask this because I feel like everyone's answer is going to be a little bit different. But what
All
do you
right.
feel like, your least favorite part of ministry is and your favorite part of ministry is? Could it be the staff meeting every week? That's your favorite part that you get to see me? Is it the least favorite part that you have to see me every staff
Oh, no. The
what
favorite
do you,
part is definitely seeing Derek every week right there.
woo! So what do you consider your favorite? And what do you consider your least favorite of ministry?
Mm. My least favorite is John Maxwell said one time that leadership is letting people down at a rate they can handle. Because leadership is leading people, and that doesn't always mean leading people in the direction they want to go, because God has put them under your leadership for that season. And I think that God gives you a vision for where they need to go for that season, and that's something you have to be accountable for. And so what I don't like doing is I don't like having to having to have grace and truth with people. Sometimes because you love them, you have to tell them something uncomfortable, and I don't like doing that. And so my least favorite is when I have to have difficult conversations, because I want to help people, but I wish it never included, iron sharpening iron. People say that verse, think it's wonderful, but when you sharpen iron, there's heat, there's friction, there's sparks. It's uncomfortable. It's loud. There's nothing fun about sharpening iron. The only fun thing is when you have something sharp at the end of it. But unfortunately, I heard this. Steve Jobs said one time, if you want to make everybody happy, be an ice cream salesman. If you want to be a leader, that's something entirely different. And that is the part of leadership I don't like, is that along the way we hurt people. And I think a good leader, they accept that, but they never get used to it. And along the way, the vision God has given me has crossed the wrong way with other people's visions, and um, and without meaning to, it's hurt people. And that's never been my goal. And those are the things that keep me up at night. Is could I have said that differently so that it didn't hurt that person? And now my favorite thing is, I love church, man. I love watching people worship. I love watching people develop in their gifts. I love watching people take a step. My one of my favorite days, and I'm not saying this because I'm talking to you. One of my favorite days was y'all's first Easter, because we had all these plans and all these things we had to do, and it was stressful. And I don't know if it was a Thursday or a Friday, but I had come by the church and you and Bree both were just struggling, stressed out and all
What's
the
new? What's new though?
and I was trying to tell you, I said, listen, guys, Sunday's coming. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. And I remember Bree was like, I don't know, Pastor. It was all that. And then Sunday was amazing. We had a bunch of people get saved. All of the worship elements went wonderful. Everything was great. And y'all were so happy at the end of that. And that was just, it was one of those days you walk home or get home and you go, man, that was awesome. You got to see some young leaders take steps. You got to see people come into the kingdom of God. You got to see community happen. I love church, man. I love all the things. I love all the things that happen with church. I'm a church junkie. And so
and the church loves you, Pastor Brandon.
Come on. Absolutely. They better.
Loves you. So speaking of young leaders, what would you say to young Pastor Brandon Cannon back in the day?
We overestimate what we can do in the short term, and we underestimate a lifetime of faithfulness. That's what I would say. I would say, slow down. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Stop taking everything so serious. Don't forget, you are not trying to convince God to help you. So he already wants to help you. So usually the thing holding you back the most is you holding on to your plans. My goal in life is to be a faithful failure, to fail at all of my plans and succeed at all of his. And so I would tell myself, slow down. It's going to take longer than you wish, but it's going to be more amazing than you can imagine. Take it one step at a time, and whatever you do, don't quit. I think almost everybody who quits a little bit too soon. And so I would just tell myself, don't quit, and it's worth it.
I love it, dude. There's an artist that I listen to. He always says success is never a number, but it's faithful labor. And it's just staying consistent to exactly what you do and never giving up.
Well, and I think too, and this is everybody. We live in a world where it's so easy to compare ourselves to others. And we say all day long, we know that the people in our social media world, that's not how they really live, but we don't really believe that, because we do look at their lives and we compare. And comparison is natural, but it's unhealthy. And especially in the ministry world, we have such a dichotomy of, on one way, the goal is to forget ourselves and to be more like Jesus. But then people expect us to be developing this ministry. I mean, what's so funny is people think that the only prerequisite to be a church expert is to attend church. That doesn't happen in any other world. Think about that. I never go into Kroger and tell them how to run their business because I shop there. I automatically assume I don't know how their business works. But for church, because I attend, I must know everything, right? And so there's always a critic. But the thing is to realize is that as a pastor, there is this dichotomy of forgetting ourselves, but yet developing ourselves at the same time.
Yeah.
And so what we have to realize is you are never going to succeed at ministry at being the very best somebody else you can be. God didn't call that person to pastor your church or to do your ministry. And so honestly, if they were at your church, they wouldn't be successful. Because if they are successful, it's because they found exactly where they were and they're doing exactly what God called them to do. You think about the most successful ministry leaders. They are so unique. They are not like anybody else. And they are laser focused on what God's called them to do. And I think that if we as ministry leaders can figure out who we are and get laser focused at who we are, Jesus said there's some people who are 30, 60, and 100-fold successful. But the thing is for all of those people, Jesus said, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few, now you'll be a ruler over many. I think we're going to be really surprised at what God counts when we get to heaven. And I don't think the people with the biggest churches, the biggest record labels, those are going to be the most successful people in heaven. I think it's going to be the most faithful people when we get to heaven.
Yeah, it's not a tier level of tier 1 Christians, tier 2. We're all on the same platform.
Yeah, because all of us could only be saved by the grace of God. And when we get to heaven, I really don't think we're going to have a competition. I think we're all going to say, oh my goodness, look at God's faithfulness. And that's all that's going to matter one day. But we got to get that. We got to practice resurrection now. We got to figure out how to get that resurrection mindset now. And it takes a lifetime. So that's the other thing is if you struggle with it, don't be too hard on yourself. We're all there. Even that person who said they don't struggle with it, they're lying. And God's going to forgive them. It's okay. But they are. But to practice resurrection every day. to say, I'm not living my life for today. I'm living my life for eternity today.
Mhm.
In every single day.
Well, on that note, I want to ask you one more question. All right.
All right.
So basically, this podcast is specifically made to encourage other pastors and let them know that they are not alone, and also encourage local people by showing their local pastor is also human. What would be an easy way for people to encourage their local pastor?
Man, I would tell you, number one is to tell him, is the people you don't think need encouragement that probably need it the most. Pastors try to be strong. They try to be giving, all those things, and those are great, but they still are human. They have bad days. They have arguments with their kids and their spouse. They have insecurities. And so let them know how you feel about them, and let them know often how you feel about them, because for every one good thing they hear 10 negative things. And so they need that constant encouragement. And the second thing is, if you want to encourage your pastor, be patient with him. Everything you see about your church that you don't like, he sees it too. And there may be really good reasons why he hasn't done anything about it. Maybe they don't have the finances, or they don't have the people, or whatever. And so don't assume that he's blind to it. He sees it, and it probably gets on his nerves more than it does yours. So just be patient. And if it bothers you enough, become the catalyst, become the change agent, and say, Pastor, how can I help you make this vision happen? And you will be your pastor's best friend, is to tell him often how much you love him, to give him a break, and then also say, how can I make a difference with you? Because the Bible said Moses had been given the anointing when he held up the staff, that Israel was conquering their enemies, but he got tired. And what he needed two people to come on either side to help him carry the load. And a lot of pastors need some people to come and carry that load.
Well, I try to tell you often, man, that I love you, and I'm thankful that you are my pastor. And
I appreciate it.
You're just the man, dude. You encourage me in ways that most people haven't in the past. I'm thankful for your friendship, and I feel like you need encouraged more.
Well, hey, man, I tell you, it's easy. It's easy to do ministry when we got people like you with us. I'm telling you. I mean,
hey, man, I only ask for one thing from you, love and affection. That's all I ask.
A big kiss every once in a while. Right?
No, not from you. All right, man. So how can people get connected with you on social media or watch your sermons on YouTube?
All those things. Social media is the Brandon Cannon, because Brandon Cannon was taken, so I had to put the "the" in there. Everywhere else is just Brandon Cannon. I am working on a blog, brandoncannon.com, where my goal in life is to be a little bit more like Jesus every day. And also that is my YouTube channel, and also at Real Life Church. And the main thing is find through those elements to get in touch with me. Send me a Facebook message. I want to do life with people. And so you take the first step by reaching out to me, and we'll do it. Any way I can help you, it is my honor.
Well, I love you, man. Thank you so much for hopping on here to Local People, Local Pastor.
Yeah, man, I love you. Thank you for doing this, man. It's going to do a whole lot more good than I think you could even realize. People like me, especially early on in this adventure of pastoring, I needed stuff like this. And it was resources like this that I found that kept me from turning that resignation letter in a few times. And so you're making a difference. Only when we get to heaven will we better look at people and go, man, I'm here because of you. And so thank you for doing this.
Of course, man. Love you, dude.
Love you, man.
Thank you very much for being here today. If you are new with us, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Make sure you get connected with us on social media. And furthermore, if you are encouraged by today's podcast, make sure you share it with somebody so they can be encouraged as well. Once again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed Local People, Local Pastor.